Hello and welcome back to Void Whispers. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy drifting into dark, chilling tales whispered from the void, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1. Next Friday, I'll retire after 23 years as a police detective in northern New York. Most of the cases I worked faded over time. Names blur, dates slip. Scenes that once felt sharp turn into vague impressions, like old photographs left out in the sun. But a few cases never left me. Not because they were the most violent or because they were the kind of thing people make documentaries about. They stayed because they left me with the feeling that something about the world was slightly off, like reality had a seam in it, and for a moment I saw what was underneath. I've kept quiet about those cases for most of my career. You learn early on that if you want to keep doing the job, you don't talk about the ones that make you sound crazy. You write what you can justify. You stick to what can be backed up. You don't give your coworkers a reason to look at you differently or give a defense attorney something to chew on later. But retirement does something to you. It loosens the grip you keep on certain memories. And it makes you ask yourself what you owe the dead and what you owe the truth, even when the truth sounds impossible. So I'm going to tell one story. I'll change names. I won't share an exact location. Some parts were documented, some were witnessed by more than one officer, and some parts only I saw, and I know how that sounds. This happened on Thanksgiving in 2008. A young nurse, I'll call her Ellen, spent most of the holiday with her family. Later, her mother described Ellen's behavior as a nervous stupor. That was the phrase she used with me. Ellen sat in the living room, barely eating, barely talking, jumping at small noises, checking her phone too often, and glancing toward the windows like she expected someone to be standing out there. Her family tried to keep things normal. People do that when something feels wrong. They set the table anyway. They pass food around anyway. They pretend conversation is still conversation. They tell themselves it's just stress. But Ellen's mother couldn't let it go. Before Ellen left that night, her mother followed her to the front door and asked quietly, the way you ask a question when you're afraid of the answer, if everything was all right. Ellen tried to brush it off at first. She gave a vague response, something about being tired, something about work. But her mother pushed a little, and Ellen finally admitted what she'd been holding inside. For the past week, she said she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following her, not in a dramatic way where she'd seen a stranger every day or caught someone peeking around corners. She described it more like a constant pressure, like an awareness at the back of her neck, like a set of eyes she couldn't locate. Most of it was bad feelings, as she put it, and she knew how that sounded. But the night before Thanksgiving, she said it got worse. She'd been lying awake in her bedroom at the front of the house, staring at the ceiling, when she started hearing footsteps outside her window. Slow, steady pacing on the sidewalk in front of her home. Not a jogger passing by, not someone walking a dog. Back and forth, for what she said felt like hours. Eventually, she forced herself to move. She got out of bed and looked through the blinds. The street was empty. No person, no car. No dog. Still, she was certain she'd heard it. And after she looked out and saw nothing, she said she heard frantic footsteps running away down the street, as if whoever had been there suddenly realized she'd noticed. Her mother told me later that she felt sick hearing it. Ellen lived in an affluent part of town, quiet streets, well-kept lawns, the kind of neighborhood where people feel safe enough to forget that safety is a fragile thing. Before Ellen left her parents' house that night, both her mother and father insisted she call them the moment she got home. Ellen promised she would. She never did. About an hour after she should have arrived, her parents tried calling her. No answer. They texted. No response. They waited a little longer, hoping she'd just fallen asleep and forgotten to call. Then their worry turned into fear, and fear turned into action. They drove to her house themselves. Her car was in the driveway, engine idling. The front door was standing wide open. The lights inside the house were on, warm yellow lights spilling onto the porch. But Ellen was nowhere to be found. That was the scene when I arrived a little after 11, along with 2 patrol officers. Ellen's parents were in the yard, standing close together like they were holding each other up. One officer stayed outside with them to get a statement while his partner, a patrolman named Sean, came inside with me so we could clear the house again. From the moment I crossed the threshold, the house felt wrong. Nothing looked damaged, nothing looked ransacked. The decor was warm and cozy, earth-tone walls, dim lamps, rustic furniture, that old world style some people like. Years later, I learned the name for it was Tuscan. It was the kind of home that should have felt inviting, like a place where you'd smell candles and cooked food. Instead, it felt bleak. I don't mean it felt spooky. I mean it felt ruined, like walking into a room after bad news has already happened there. I'd only felt that exact atmosphere at certain murder scenes, not the violence itself. More like the aftermath, the heavy certainty that something had been taken away and couldn't be put back. And with every step I took, I felt something else. The strong sensation that someone was walking directly behind me, matching my pace perfectly. At the time, I blamed nerves. I told myself it was adrenaline and the pressure of the call. A missing young woman on a holiday night, parents outside, a house open, a car running. My brain had plenty of reasons to be on edge. But I've replayed that night too many times, and I can't help wondering if it really was only nerves. Sean moved into the kitchen to check the back door and the windows while I went down a hallway toward the bedrooms. The hall felt longer than it should have. Houses don't usually confuse me, not after years of walking through strangers' homes for a living. But this one did. It felt like the layout didn't match the outside, like the space stretched just a little too far. I was half-focused, scanning doorways, listening for any sound, when I passed an open bathroom door and something inside it registered a beat too late. I kept walking for another step, reaching the master bedroom door. Then something in my mind snapped backward. In the moonlight coming through the bathroom's small window, I had seen a man sitting on the toilet. It hit me all at once, the way your brain finally admits what it saw when it stops trying to rationalize it away. The man looked to be in his 80s. He was completely nude. He sat hunched forward with his elbows on his knees, his head buried in his hands like he was in severe pain, or praying, or trying not to be sick. I didn't understand why he was there, and in that moment, my job took over. If there was a person in the house, we had to control the situation immediately. If Ellen was inside too, it could mean anything. My body caught up to my eyes, and I turned back fast, moving into the bathroom. I called for Sean as I went, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. The bathroom was empty. Empty in a way that made my skin tighten. No old man, no movement, no sound, just tiles, sink, toilet. A towel hanging neatly on a bar like this was any other night. Sean came down the hall and asked me what was going on. I told him to keep an eye out for someone moving through the house. He asked if I'd seen someone. I didn't know what to say. The truth sounded ridiculous even to me. I'm not sure, I told him. But stay alert. The next thing I learned with my nose. When I opened the door to the master bedroom, a sickly sweet smell poured out at me. It was unmistakable. It was death. Ellen's parents hadn't fully checked the house. I understood why. Most people can't force themselves to open every door when their worst fear is waiting behind one of them. I stepped into the bedroom and scanned. Nothing looked disturbed. The room was ordinary in every way. Dresser, curtains, a bedside table, clothes folded over a chair. It looked lived in, like someone had gotten ready for bed and then left. I reached for the light switch by reflex. Despite every other light in the house working, the bedroom light did nothing. That detail bothered me in a way I can't explain. It wasn't evidence. It wasn't proof of anything. It was just another small wrongness, one more piece that didn't fit. I pulled out my flashlight and stepped farther in, already knowing I wasn't leaving this room without finding something I didn't want to find. Before I tell you what was under that bed, I need to tell you about something else that happened first. It's not the most important detail, but it's the one that plays in my head the clearest. Above the bed hung a framed photograph. It showed Ellen standing beside the Grand Canyon, smiling, pointing out at the landscape like she was showing the world to the person behind the camera. She looked kind in that photo, steady, like the sort of person you trust without needing a reason. The kind of nurse people hope they get. As I stepped into the room, the frame shifted. It didn't fall completely. It slid on its hook and tilted downward, hanging at an angle. And in that new angle, Ellen was no longer pointing out at the canyon. She was pointing down toward the bed. I craned my neck automatically, shining my flashlight across the mattress, and I let out a quiet breath of relief when I saw the bed was empty. The relief lasted about 1 second. A rough, hoarse giggle came from the left side of the room. I turned, and in the corner, my flashlight caught the faint outline of a figure standing in the darkness. My heart kicked hard in my chest. I drew my service weapon, raised it, and ordered the figure to put their hands up. It complied. Slowly, like it had all the time in the world, it stepped forward into the moonlight. My mind stalled. It genuinely stalled, like it refused to produce a normal description because normal didn't apply. In the moment, my brain went blank in a way I'd never experienced on the job. Only years later have I been able to describe it without my thoughts slipping. It was the same old man I had seen in the bathroom. Still nude, still hunched, still looking ancient. His skin hung on him in loose folds, as if he were wearing a suit several sizes too large. It moved strangely when he moved, not like muscle and fat under skin, but like the skin itself had too much room. Like it didn't belong to him properly, but that wasn't what broke my ability to think. It was his head. It wasn't a single face anymore. It stretched outward into something like a clustered frame of faces, 4 of them at least, all identical, all wearing the same wide, fixed grin, all staring at me with the same manic focus, as if each face was a separate copy of the same person displayed on different screens. The eyes in each face bulged outward, glossy and strained, like something inside his skull was pushing hard from behind. His cheekbones were sunken, giving the faces a skeletal look, but the grin was too full of life, too eager. He shuffled forward, slow at first. Then, without warning, he took one sharp, aggressive step toward me. My mind didn't keep up. My body reacted like a child backing away from a monster in a closet. I stumbled and fell backward, hard, the air leaving my lungs. When I hit the floor, the smell of death became thicker, stronger, so heavy it felt like it had weight. It filled my mouth and nose. I gagged, trying to breathe through it. I turned my head to the right, and under the bed, I saw why. A young woman's body lay stuffed beneath it. She was bloated and swollen. Her face was distended beyond recognition, the features stretched and ruined by decomposition. Her limbs looked wrong, bent back behind her as if they'd been forced into a position no body should ever be in. Her skin had a pale green cast, and there were faint dark lines under it, like something had begun to spread through her from the inside. It was Ellen. I didn't know how my mind knew it instantly when her face wasn't even her face anymore, but it did. The moment my brain fully accepted what I was seeing under the bed, I heard a woman scream outside. Then I heard the other patrol officer yelling, "Stop," followed by the sound of someone running hard over gravel. I tore my eyes from the body and looked back toward the corner. The old man, if that's what he was gone. Not slipping out the door, not hiding. Gone like a light switching off. Sean rushed into the bedroom a second later, breathless, asking what was happening, what I'd found, what the screaming was. I couldn't speak. I just pointed under the bed. Out front, the other officer pursued what he said was a nude male figure moving fast away from the property. Ellen's mother and father saw it too, just long enough to scream and point. The officer chased it through a couple turns in the neighborhood, but it moved strangely and quickly, and he lost it. He eventually had to stand down and return. Later, when I asked him for a detailed description, he said something that matched what my eyes had struggled with in the bedroom. He said the figure's motion looked wrong, like the man's skin was shifting as if it were underwater. After that night, the case turned into a mess that never truly got cleaned up. I was criticized for letting the suspect slip away, even though I never had a chance to pursue him. My report was picked apart. My description of what I'd seen in the bedroom was labeled unhelpful. The part about multiple faces was dismissed almost immediately. People didn't say it to my face in those exact words, but the message was clear. Write what can be used, not what will get you sent to a department therapist. Even the idea that the suspect might have been deformed was brushed aside. The official thinking became that I'd seen a nude elderly man in low light. Then later, my mind filled in details under stress. Except I wasn't the only one who saw a nude male figure that night, and then the coroner made it worse. Ellen's cause of death was strangulation, but based on the state of decomposition, the coroner was firm that she'd been dead for several days. Several days. That should have been impossible. The timeline didn't allow it. Ellen had been with her family earlier that day. She was seen alive. She drove to her parents' house. She spoke. She ate a little. She left. If she'd been dead for days, none of that could have happened. Because of the coroner's estimate, the investigation shifted hard toward the family. That's what happens when the timeline doesn't make sense. You start looking at the people closest to the victim because they're the easiest to place near her, and because in most cases, the simplest explanation is the right one. But that line of inquiry collapsed. Surveillance footage surfaced from a gas station. It showed Ellen stopping for gas alone just 55 minutes before the 911 call. She was alive, she was moving normally, she paid, she drove away. Whatever happened to her happened within that 55-minute window, yet her body looked like it had been gone for days. We never found a reason for that. We never found a chemical explanation, never found evidence of unusual heat exposure, never found anything that could comfortably account for a rate of decomposition like that. We chased leads rooted in reality for years. Tips, reports of suspicious people, similar crimes, registered offenders, anyone elderly in the area, anyone who could have been seen nude, anything that sounded like it might connect. Every lead ended where reality always ends them when you're trying to force it to explain something it didn't create. Nowhere. Ellen's murder remains unsolved. It is the case that has haunted me the most because I know what I saw in that house, and I also know it shouldn't be possible. I know how the world works. I know what stress can do to perception. I know what trauma can do to memory. And still, when I close my eyes, I can see that corner of the bedroom. I can hear that rough giggle. I can smell death so thick it felt like a physical thing. We spent years searching for a human explanation because that's what you do. That's what the job demands. That's what keeps you sane. But the truth of it, whatever the truth is, doesn't sit in the world where police work succeeds. It sits somewhere else, in a place that doesn't care about evidence bags and interview rooms and warrants. And after 23 years, I can tell you one thing with complete certainty. Something was in that house with us that night, and it wasn't supposed to exist. Story 2. The fire cracked and snapped in front of us, but there was something wrong with the sound. It did not sound like dry wood burning. It sounded wet and heavy, almost like bones breaking under a boot. Every time the flames shifted, they gave off that sharp, ugly snap, and every time I heard it, something deep inside me tightened. I sat on a moss-covered log with the heat of the fire warming my legs. Across from me were Marcus, Sarah, and Julian. They were laughing, passing drinks back and forth, acting like this was exactly the weekend we had all been talking about for months. A reunion. A break from work, bills, relationships, and everything else that had slowly pulled us away from each other after college. We had called it the Great Reunion as a joke, even though there were only 4 of us. The plan had been simple. Drive out to Blackwood Pines, spend the weekend camping, drink too much beer, hike trails we were probably too out of shape for, and pretend for a couple of days that we were still the same people we used to be. Back then, that sounded perfect. But as the sun sank behind the jagged line of hills, the forest changed. At first, it was just the normal darkness of the woods, long shadows, cold air, the firelight reaching only so far before the trees swallowed it. Then the shadows began to feel wrong. They didn't simply stretch across the ground. They seemed to detach from the trees, sliding between trunks like they had weight and purpose. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was tired from the drive. The woods always look strange at night if you stare too long. Marcus laughed loudly at something Julian said. Sarah leaned back, smiling into her mug. For a moment, everything felt normal again. Then Sarah stopped laughing. "Did you hear that?" she asked. Her voice was quiet enough that all three of us turned toward her at once. The forest went still. Sarah held her mug with both hands. Her knuckles had gone pale from how tightly she gripped it. She stared into the darkness beyond the fire like she had seen something move between the trees. Marcus rolled his eyes, but I noticed his hand drifted toward the hatchet buried in the old stump beside him. "It's just a coyote, Sarah," he said. He tried to sound casual. He did not. We all waited. For several seconds, there was nothing but the fire and the wind moving high above us through the branches. Then the sound came again. It was not a howl. It was not anything I had ever heard an animal make. It was a whistle. High, clear, almost musical. It held for far too long, stretching through the trees without a break, without breath. It sounded like a person trying to copy a bird, except no human lungs could have carried a note that long. Julian slowly lowered his bottle. "What the hell was that?" Nobody answered. Then the smell reached us. It moved into the clearing like a fog, damp, rotten, metallic. It reminded me of a cellar flooded with dirty water and old copper pipes. There was something almost sweet underneath it, too, but not in a good way. Sweet like meat left out too long? Julian stood. "Something's out there," he whispered. "Something big." The darkness between two trees shifted. At first, I thought it was only a shadow. Then it stepped forward. A figure moved into the edge of the firelight. It was tall, too tall to be human. 10 feet, maybe more. Its limbs were long and thin, like dead branches pulled from a white tree. Its skin was pale and tight, stretched over a narrow body that looked starved and ancient. It had no face the way a person has a face. No eyes, no nose, just a smooth, blank surface where features should have been, and a single vertical slit where a mouth belonged. It did not walk normally. It drifted. Its long toes dragged through the dirt, leaving dark, oily streaks behind it. For 1 second, none of us moved. Then I screamed, "Run." Everything broke apart at once. Marcus grabbed the hatchet. Sarah dropped her mug. Julian stumbled backward and nearly fell into the fire. Then all of us ran into the trees, away from the clearing, away from that pale thing standing between the trunks. Our flashlights bounced wildly through the fog. Branches slapped my arms and face, roots caught at my boots. My lungs burned almost immediately, but I kept running because behind us, somewhere in the dark, the whistle started again. It followed us, not fast, not urgent. That was the worst part. The creature did not sound like it was chasing. It sounded calm, patient, like it knew there was no need to hurry. The whistle rose and fell behind us, beautiful and horrible. And every time the note peaked, the forest seemed to bend. Trees leaned at impossible angles. The ground softened beneath my feet, becoming warm and spongy like I was stepping on living tissue instead of dirt. My flashlight beam cut through the mist, but the trees ahead appeared and vanished in ways that made no sense. Sarah was crying as she ran. Marcus kept yelling for us to stay together. Julian was breathing hard somewhere behind me, each inhale tearing from his chest. Then we saw the old ranger station. It appeared suddenly through the trees, a dark square shape with broken windows and a sagging roof. The wood was rotting. The porch had partially collapsed. The windows looked like jagged teeth. But it was shelter, and at that moment, shelter meant hope. We burst through the front door and slammed it shut behind us. Marcus threw the heavy bolt into place. Sarah shoved a broken chair under the handle, even though it probably wouldn't help. For a few seconds, all four of us stood there gasping. "Is everyone okay?" I asked. My voice sounded thin and useless. Julian groaned. I think I'm hit." He slumped against the wall, one hand pressed to his side. Dark blood seeped through his fingers. It looked almost black in the weak beams of our flashlights. Sarah covered her mouth. "Oh my God." Julian tried to laugh, but only coughed. "I don't even know what got me." "We have to get out of here," Sarah said. Her voice was shaking badly now. "We have to get back to the car." "The car is miles away," Marcus snapped. His face was pale, and the tough act he always carried had cracked apart. "We stay here. We wait for dawn. Stay together, keep the door locked, survive the night." But dawn never came. I checked my watch. 2:14 a.m. I checked again 10 minutes later. 2:14 a.m. At first, I thought my watch was broken. No service, but the time still showed. 2:14 a.m. Marcus swore under his breath. Julian sat on the floor, shivering, his head resting against the wall. Then the whistle began again. This time, it did not come from outside. It came from inside the walls. Sarah screamed. The sound moved around us slowly, sliding through the wood under the floor above the ceiling. It was everywhere and nowhere. The station seemed to breathe around it. Then we started seeing pieces of the creature. Not all at once. A long gray finger dragged across the ceiling, leaving a wet black line behind it. When Marcus shone his flashlight up, the finger was gone. A pale, eyeless face appeared in a broken mirror on the far wall. I turned toward it, and the mirror showed only our own terrified shapes. Something scratched softly inside the locked supply closet. Sarah kept whispering, "No, no, no," like the word could hold the room together. It was playing with us. That was the only way to describe it. It did not need to rush. It did not need to break the door down. It was already inside somehow, appearing in corners, reflections, cracks, and blind spots. It fed on every gasp, every jump, every moment when our hearts kicked harder in our chests. Marcus was the first one taken. He said he was going to check the window. I told him not to, but he ignored me. He always had to do something. Standing still made him feel weak. He moved toward the window with the hatchet raised. A pale arm reached through the solid wall as if the wood were water. It wrapped around his chest. Marcus had only enough time to look surprised. Then it pulled him backward through the wall. Not through the window, through the wall. There was no full scream, only a choked sound cut short by the whistle rising into a wet, heavy thud outside. Sarah lost control after that. She backed into me, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. I held her shoulders and told her not to move, not to go near the walls, not to look at the windows. She was standing right beside me. I turned for 1 second to check Julian. When I looked back, Sarah was gone. Her clothes were on the floor, just a loose pile of pink fabric and shoes, empty and flattened as if the body inside them had been removed without disturbing them. The air smelled sharp suddenly, like ozone after lightning. I screamed her name until my throat hurt. Nothing answered except the whistle. Then it was just me and Julian. Julian looked worse now. His skin had gone pale, almost gray. Sweat covered his face. His eyes rolled slightly in his head, struggling to focus. "Elias," he whispered. I crouched beside him. "I'm here. Does your chest hurt?" "What?" "My chest," he said. His voice sounded far away, like it was coming from the bottom of a deep well. "It feels like it's full of glass." I stared at him, confused and terrified. Then he said, "I can't remember how we got to the woods." "What are you talking about?" "I remember the car," Julian whispered. "I remember music. I remember Marcus driving." Then he swallowed hard. "Then I don't know." I tried to think back. The campsite, the fire, the beer, the hike. Before that, the car ride. I remembered Marcus driving his SUV. Sarah in the front seat, Julian and me in the back. Music playing too loud. Someone laughing, a bag of chips being passed around. Then there was a gap. No, not a gap. A flash. A scream of tires. The smell of burning rubber. A deer standing in the middle of the road. Except it had not looked like a deer. Not really. The door to the ranger station creaked open. The creature stood there. It was not 10 feet tall anymore. It was closer to the size of a man. Still thin, still pale, still faceless except for that vertical slit mouth. It stepped toward me. I could not move. Its mouth opened slowly, revealing rows of needle-thin teeth inside the slit. But it did not bite. It lifted one long hand and touched my forehead with one freezing finger. Then it whistled 2 words. Wake up. The world shattered. I gasped and opened my eyes. I was back at the campfire. The flames were high. Marcus, Sarah, and Julian sat across from me, laughing. The night air smelled like smoke and damp pine. The same log pressed beneath me. The same heat licked at my shins. Sarah stopped laughing. Did you hear that? She asked. A cold spike of dread went through me. Sarah, I said, standing too fast. Marcus, Julian, we need to leave. Right now. What? We need to get in the car and go. Relax, Elias, he said, reaching toward the hatchet. It's just a coyote. No, my voice cracked. We've done this already. The whistle, the ranger station, the blood. Marcus, you get pulled through the wall. Sarah disappears. Julian gets hurt. We have been here before. They stared at me, not with fear, with pity, like I was having a breakdown. Then the whistle drifted through the trees, high, clear, beautiful. Run, I screamed, but my voice felt thin like I was shouting underwater. The cycle repeated. We ran through the woods. The trees warped. The ground softened. We reached the ranger station. Julian bled against the wall. Marcus checked the window and was dragged away. Sarah disappeared beside me. The clock stayed frozen at 2:14 a.m. when the creature touched my forehead again. I did not fight. I let the world break. I woke up at the campfire again. Sarah laughed, then stopped. Did you hear that? She asked. Stop, I whispered. My hands went to my head. Please stop. Marcus said something, but I barely heard him. Julian was smiling like nothing had happened. Sarah was looking into the dark, waiting for the sound she had heard a dozen times or 100 times. I didn't know anymore. The whistle came again. This time, the creature did not wait in the woods. It stepped directly into the fire. The flames passed through its pale body without burning it. Marcus, Sarah, and Julian stopped moving. They froze in place like statues, their faces caught in the middle of laughter, their eyes fixed on the flames. The creature turned toward me. Its mouth slit open. It did not whistle this time. It spoke with the voices of my friends combined together. You're the only one left who hasn't accepted it, Elias. I fell to my knees. Accepted what? The creature raised one long hand toward the edge of the clearing. The darkness peeled away like old wallpaper. And I saw the truth. We were not in Blackwood Pines. Not really. At the bottom of a ravine, Marcus's SUV was wrapped around a massive oak tree. The front end had folded in on itself. Broken glass glittered across the dirt. Smoke rose from the crushed hood. At the top of the hill, blue police lights flashed through the trees. Paramedics moved quietly around the wreck. They were covering bodies with white sheets. I saw Marcus first. His neck was bent at an angle no neck should ever bend. Sarah lay nearby, her pink dress dark with oil and blood. Julian had been thrown far from the wreck, one arm twisted beneath him, his face pale under the flashing lights. Then I saw the fourth body. It was trapped behind the steering wheel. The chest was crushed inward. The eyes were open, wide and glassy, staring at nothing. It was me. The accident happened 3 hours ago, the creature said. Its voice was hollow and calm. The thing you call the creature is only your mind trying to understand the transition. I shook my head. No. You are not being hunted, it said. You are being digested. I looked back toward the fire. Marcus, Sarah, and Julian were changing. Their skin was turning gray. Their features were smoothing over. Their bodies were stretching, growing thinner, longer, less human. Their mouths narrowed into vertical slits. Their eyes faded until there were no eyes left. We stay in the nightmare until there is nothing left of who we were, Marcus said, though his voice came from something that no longer looked like him. Then we become the woods. We become the whistle. I looked down at my hands. They were becoming transparent. My fingers were lengthening. My skin stretched tight over the bones. The pain in my chest, the pain I had not allowed myself to feel, suddenly pressed against me from every direction. Crushed ribs, broken glass, cold dirt, blood in my mouth, the fading sound of sirens too far away to matter. Then came another feeling, a desire to whistle. It rose in me gently, almost kindly, a high, beautiful note waiting behind my teeth. It promised peace. It promised I would not have to feel the crushed chest anymore. I would not have to remember the ravine. I would not have to know I was dead. The creature leaned close. Its breath smelled like stagnant water and old copper. "It's 2:14 a.m., Elias," it whispered. "It's time to go back to the fire." My memories began to dissolve. I forgot the car ride first, then the music, then the sound of Marcus laughing behind the wheel. I forgot my mother's name. I forgot the feeling of sunlight on my skin. I forgot what my own apartment looked like. All that remained was the heat of the fire, the dark trees, and the three pale things sitting across from me. Sarah turned her eyeless face toward the woods. "Did you hear that?" she asked. This time, I did not scream. I took a deep breath. My lips narrowed. The whistle slipped out of me, high and melodic and impossibly long. "It's just a coyote, Sarah," I said. The fire crackled with a wet, rhythmic snap, like bone breaking under a heavy boot. And in the darkness of Blackwood Pines, the shadows began to dance. Story 3. The sun looked like a torn red wound on the horizon as Miles and Sarah drove through the Mojave. The desert stretched around them in every direction, empty and endless. The road cut through it like a black scar, shimmering in the heat even though evening was coming. Joshua trees stood far apart across the sand, twisted and still like they had been frozen in the middle of reaching for something. Their old Jeep Wrangler rattled along the highway with a sound Miles had always found comforting. The air conditioner was working as hard as it could, but the Nevada heat pushed back through the glass, through the roof, through every crack in the doors. Even with the vents blasting, the inside of the Jeep felt dry and hot. Still, they were happy. That was what Sarah would remember later. Not the fear, not the blood, not the sound of wings. At first, she would remember happiness. They had been talking about the house in Sedona, the one they had just put an offer on. Miles had been smiling all afternoon, acting calm, but Sarah knew him well enough to see the excitement under it. He kept bringing it up every few minutes, as if saying it out loud made it more real. 3 bedrooms, Miles said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. 1 for us, 1 for an office, and 1 for... He turned his head slightly and gave her that playful look. Sarah laughed. "A nursery?" she said. "Miles, we haven't even finished the road trip yet. Let's survive the desert first." He grinned. "We'll survive the desert." The universe seemed to take that as a challenge. A sudden, violent thwack exploded from the rear passenger side, then another, then a third. The Jeep lurched hard to the right. Sarah gasped and grabbed the door handle as the vehicle fishtailed across the hot asphalt. Miles gripped the steering wheel with both hands, jaw tight, knuckles white. The Jeep swayed once, twice. Then he managed to guide it onto the gravel shoulder. They stopped in a cloud of dust. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The engine rumbled. The air conditioner wheezed. Outside, the desert wind dragged sand across the road in dry whispers. Miles turned to her, breathing hard. "Are you okay?" Sarah nodded, one hand still pressed against her seatbelt. "I'm fine. What happened?" "Flat tire," he said. He tried to sound casual, but she heard the shake in his voice. He opened the door and stepped outside into the furnace heat. The evening air hit him like an open oven. He walked around the back of the Jeep, boots crunching on gravel and hard-packed dirt. Sarah stayed inside for a moment, watching him through the mirror. Then she saw his shoulders drop. "That bad?" she called. Miles crouched by the tire. "It's shredded." He stood and pulled out his phone. The way his face changed told her the answer before he said it. "Great," he muttered. "No service. Not even one bar. Not even the ghost of a signal." She opened the door and stepped out, shielding her eyes against the low sun. "We have the spare, right?" "Yeah," Miles said. "We'll be fine. I'll change it before the sun goes down." He moved to the back of the Jeep and started pulling out the jack and spare tire. Sarah leaned against the hood, trying not to think about how empty the road was. They had passed a few cars earlier, but now there was nothing. No headlights, no engines, no dust trails, just them. The desert had seemed beautiful when they were driving through it. Standing still inside, it felt different. It felt too large, too quiet. Sarah looked out across the scrub and Joshua trees. The shadows of rocks and bushes stretched long across the sand as the sun sank lower. Far away, the mountains were turning purple. Then something passed over the ground. A shadow, huge. Black, it swept across the sand so fast that for a second Sarah thought a cloud had crossed the sun. But there were no clouds. The sky was clear and empty. The shadow was wide, too wide for any bird she knew. It slid over the road, over the Jeep, over her own feet, then disappeared. Her skin tightened. "Miles," she said. He was kneeling by the tire, working the jack under the frame. "Yeah? Did you see that?" "See what? The jack?" "Yeah, I've got it." "No." A shadow. Something flew over us. He grunted, distracted. "Probably a jet. There's military land out here, isn't there?" It didn't sound like a jet. Miles twisted the jack handle. "Then maybe a big bird. Come help me with the lug nuts." Sarah wanted to laugh it off. She wanted to believe him. But the silence had changed. Now it felt like it was holding its breath. Miles worked quickly. Sweat ran down his face. His shirt stuck to his back. Sarah helped where she could, passing him tools and watching the road. The damaged tire came off. For a little while, nothing happened. Then the shadow came back. This time, it did not pass over them. It circled. The air moved above them with a heavy beat. Whump, whump, whump. Sarah's hair whipped across her face. A smell washed over them. Foul and warm. Old copper. Rotting meat. "Miles," she whispered. He was tightening the final lug nut. The sound came again. Whump, whump. "Miles, look up." This time he heard it. He dropped the wrench and looked toward the dying sun. Something was circling above them. At first, Sarah's mind tried to make it into something normal. A large bird, a helicopter, a military drone, a small plane passing low. But none of those answers fit. The thing moved like a bird, but it was far too large. Its wings were wide and ragged at the edges, beating slowly against the hot evening air. It circled once, twice, then folded its wings and dropped. Miles grabbed Sarah's wrist and pulled her back. The creature fell toward the road. At the last second, its wings opened with a violent snap, and it landed 20 feet in front of the Jeep. The impact shook the ground. Dust exploded around it. Sarah could not move. Miles could not speak. The dust settled slowly, and they saw it. The creature stood nearly 7 feet tall. Its body was shaped like a massive vulture, bloated and feathered, covered in oily black plumage that seemed to swallow the last light of the sun. Its wings were folded against its sides, huge and ragged. Its chest rose and fell with slow breaths. But where a bird's neck should have been, there was a pale human neck. Long, wrinkled, too thin for the body beneath it. At the top of that neck was the head of a woman. Her face was gaunt and stretched tight over sharp bones. Her nose hooked down like a beak. Her mouth was wide and thin, her eyes were cloudy white, milky, and blind-looking, yet somehow Sarah knew the thing could see them perfectly. The worst part was not the face. It was the limbs. 2 small human arms grew from the sides of the creature's feathered chest. They were gray, thin, and useless-looking, twitching against the black feathers like the limbs of a dead baby bird. Below the body, instead of talons, were 2 enormous human feet. Perfectly shaped, huge. The yellowed toenails were manicured, cracked, and digging into the asphalt. Sarah remembered a story then. A stupid local legend they had laughed about at a gas station 2 days earlier. An old man near the coffee machine had warned them not to stop in the open desert after sundown. He had said there was something in the high peaks, something that took travelers. Miles had smiled politely. Sarah had joked about it once they were back in the Jeep. Now the name came back to her. The Vulture Woman, she whispered. The thing tilted its head. Miles snapped out of his shock first. Sarah, get in the car. Sarah, he said louder. Now. Miles dove through the driver's door and lunged across the center console toward the glove compartment. Sarah scrambled in on the passenger side, hands shaking so hard she could barely grip the handle. Miles pulled out the handgun he kept for road trips, a 9mm. He had always been careful with it, cleaned it, maintained it, checked it before every long drive. Sarah had teased him for being paranoid. Now he aimed it through the open window at the creature. The Vulture Woman watched. Miles pulled the trigger. Click. Nothing. He froze. He pulled back the slide, hands shaking, and tried again. Click. The gun sounded empty. Dead, useless. Miles stared at it like it had betrayed him. The creature made a wet clicking sound in her throat. Then she moved. For something so large, she was horribly fast. She crossed the distance in a blur of feathers and pale skin. Her mouth opened. It did not open like a human mouth. It unhinged. The jaw dropped too low, stretching the skin of her face into something wide and impossible. Miles barely had time to scream. The Vulture Woman lunged through the open driver's window. Sarah screamed and pressed herself against the passenger door. The creature did not tear Miles apart. That would have been quicker. Instead, she swallowed him. Her mouth closed around his head and shoulders first. Miles kicked, thrashed, and slammed his fists against the window frame. Sarah grabbed his arm and pulled with everything she had, but his skin slipped from her fingers. The Vulture Woman made a deep, wet, gulping sound. Miles's torso disappeared. His legs kicked wildly against the dashboard. One boot struck the steering wheel and the horn blared in one long, terrified note. Then his knees went in, then his feet. The horn stopped. Sarah sat frozen, staring at the thing outside the window. A Miles-shaped bulge slid down the creature's long, pale throat. The skin stretched around him, pulsing as he was forced down into the black-feathered body. The Vulture Woman lifted her head. Her throat worked slowly. Then the bulge vanished into her swollen belly. She let out a low, satisfied hiss. Sarah's mind broke open. She screamed, shoved the passenger door open, and ran. She did not think about the road. She did not think about the Jeep. She did not think about where she was going. She only ran into the desert, shoes slipping in sand and loose rock, lungs burning in the dry air. Behind her, she heard heavy steps. Not wings, feet. The Vulture Woman was running after her. The sound was wrong. A heavy, slapping gallop. Human feet striking sand with the weight of something much larger than any person. Sarah made it maybe 30 yards before something slammed into her back. The impact drove her face first into the sand. Pain exploded through her ribs. She tried to crawl, but one massive foot pressed down between her shoulder blades, pinning her in place. The weight was unbelievable. Like a boulder had fallen on her. She gasped, mouth full of sand. The creature leaned over her. Those small, useless arms fluttered against her feathered chest, but her huge feet did the real work. Long toes curled around Sarah's body with terrible strength. Sarah screamed as the toes gripped her. The wings opened above them. A storm of dust rose around her. Then the ground dropped away. The vulture woman lifted into the air. Sarah's world became wind, sky, and terror. She dangled below the creature, held tight in its horrible human toes as the desert fell farther and farther beneath her. She looked down and saw the Jeep shrinking beside the road, the flat tire, the tools scattered in the dust, the empty driver's seat. Then even that became small, just a speck in the Mojave. 3 weeks later, the news called it a disappearance. Authorities officially ended the search for Miles and Sarah Miller, the California couple last seen traveling through Nevada during a road trip. Their vehicle had been found abandoned on Route 95 with a repaired flat tire. A handgun was recovered from inside the Jeep, but investigators said it had jammed. Officials believed the couple may have wandered into the desert and died from exposure. Some people suspected foul play. Locals had other ideas. They whispered again about the vulture woman of the high peaks. They said this was the fourth couple to vanish along that stretch of desert in 2 years. The sheriff dismissed the rumors. He told reporters the Mojave was dangerous enough without monsters. High in the crags of the Sheep Range, hidden in a cave behind jagged limestone, Sarah Miller was still alive. Barely. The cave smelled of dust, old blood, and rotting meat. The floor was covered in a nest made from sun-bleached sticks, dried mud, strips of cloth, and human hair. Bones lay scattered near the walls. Some were old and white. Some still had dark pieces clinging to them. Sarah lay in the center of the nest. Her legs were broken. One arm hung useless at her side. Her lips were cracked. Her skin burned from fever. She had screamed for the first day until her voice disappeared. Then she had begged. Then she had prayed. Eventually, she had only whimpered. She was not alone. The vulture woman stood over her like a mother over a sick child. Her belly had gone down since the night she took Miles. Sarah tried not to think about what that meant. The creature lowered her head and made a soft cooing sound. It was almost gentle, almost loving. Then her throat bulged. Sarah turned her head weakly, trying to escape, but the creature's enormous foot pinned her shoulder. The vulture woman opened her mouth and regurgitated something warm and soft onto Sarah's lips. Sarah sobbed, but she was too weak to refuse. The creature pushed the food into her mouth with one of its small gray hands. Partially digested meat. Sarah gagged. The vulture woman cooed again and stroked Sarah's forehead with cold, stubby fingers. It was taking care of her. That was the worst part. It had not eaten her. Not yet. Sarah's feverish eyes drifted toward the edge of the nest. There, piled like firewood, were bones. Human bones. Dozens of them. Men and women. Some still wore scraps of hiking gear. Some had rings on their fingers. One skull had sunglasses caught between its teeth. Previous guests, previous children, previous things the vulture woman had decided to keep. Sarah tried to crawl away, but her broken legs dragged uselessly beneath her. Pain burst through her body and made black spots dance in her vision. The vulture woman leaned close. Her milky eyes hovered inches from Sarah's face. The creature opened her mouth. For one impossible moment, Sarah thought it might speak. Instead, it let out that same low, rhythmic coo, a lullaby. Sarah began to cry. The creature pressed its face against hers, almost nuzzling her. Outside the cave, the desert wind moved through the rocks. Far below, search teams packed their vehicles and went home. Reporters moved on to newer stories. Miles and Sarah Miller became another sad mystery, another warning about traveling through the Mojave unprepared. But Sarah was still there, broken, fed, kept. And as the vulture woman settled beside her in the nest, wrapping one huge black wing around her like a blanket, Sarah finally understood something. The old stories had been wrong. The creature did not only hunt because it was hungry, it hunted because it was lonely. And in the desert, some things are worse than being eaten. Some things want to keep you alive. Some things want to take care of you forever. Story 4. A cold, damp breeze moved through the bedroom and slipped under the blankets like a hand made of ice. I lay there wrapped in the bed covers, buried under several soft blankets, trying to keep the chill away from my skin. The room was dark except for the pale light coming through the open window. The curtains shifted gently every time the wind pushed in, breathing in and out like the house itself was alive. I could have gotten up and closed the window. That would have been the easy thing to do, the sensible thing. But I had left it open on purpose. The smell from the next room had become unbearable. At first, I thought I could ignore it. I told myself I had lived through worse smells. Dead animals under the porch, rotten food in the trash, damp wood and mold after storms. But this was different. This was thick and sweet and sour all at once. It sank into the walls, it crawled into the fabric of the curtains. It coated the inside of my throat until even my whiskey tasted wrong. So I kept the window open, even though the night air was freezing. The body was in the room below. 7 days earlier, I might have called what happened an accident if anyone had asked. I could have shaped the story that way. I could have said I lost my temper for 1 second. I could have said I never meant to hurt her. I could have said the glass slipped from my hand. I could have said a lot of things, but the truth was that I had wanted her dead for months before I finally did it. Maybe longer. I had hated waking up beside her. I had hated the way she sighed when she saw me. I had hated the way she said my name, like even that small sound was a burden she had been forced to carry. I hated the house too, though I blamed her for that as well. We lived far from everything, in a place where the fields stretched too wide and the nearest neighbor might as well have been in another country. There were no passing cars, no easy excuses to leave. Every morning, the best part of my day was the first few seconds after waking, when I didn't fully remember who I was or where I lived. In those few seconds, everything was blank, peaceful. I was no one. I belonged nowhere. Then memory returned, and I remembered the house, the isolation, the marriage, and her. My wife, that witch. That poor excuse for a woman who had somehow become tied to me in every way that mattered. In papers, in debt, in habit, in the quiet hatred that filled the spaces between us. 7 days ago, I was upstairs in the bedroom, sitting in bed with a book open across my lap. I wasn't even reading properly. My eyes moved over the lines, but the words barely reached me. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes even your own breathing irritating. Then she called up from downstairs. I don't know what she said. I don't know if she was asking a question or telling me to do something. Maybe she wanted me to fix something. Maybe she was complaining. Maybe she just wanted to remind me that she was there. Usually I would have gone to the top of the stairs and shouted down for her to repeat herself. That day I looked at the empty glass on the bedside table. I picked it up. I still remember the weight of it in my hand. It wasn't heavy. Not really. Just a plain drinking glass, thick at the base, smudged with fingerprints. I carried it downstairs without thinking too hard. Or maybe I was thinking clearly for the first time in years. She was standing near the kitchen cabinets when I reached the bottom. She turned toward me, and before she could say anything else, I swung. The glass smashed against her forehead. The sound was sharper than I expected. A bright crack followed by the scatter of pieces hitting the floor. Shards stuck in her skin where the glass first struck, while the rest burst across her shoulders and chest. She dropped almost instantly, folding down like her body had forgotten how to hold itself up. She sat there on the floor, stunned, one weak hand pressed against her head. After a moment, she pulled it away and stared at the blood on her fingers. The look on her face was almost funny. Surprise, as if she couldn't believe she was bleeding, as if she hadn't spent years cutting me open in quieter ways. Her eyes filled with tears. She looked up at me, trying to speak. A few wet, broken sounds came from her mouth, but no full words. Maybe she was asking why. Maybe she was begging. Maybe she was saying my name. I walked over to her. My boots were heavy, and each step made a loud thud against the kitchen floor. I stood over her for a moment. Then I raised my foot. 8 stomps. I counted them. I am sure she was dead before I had finished half of them, but I kept going. Some part of me wanted to make certain. Another part enjoyed the certainty becoming impossible to deny. When I was done, I took off my boots by the stairs and went back upstairs. My book was still on the bed. I kept reading. For the first day, I barely looked at her. For the second, I stepped around the mess like it was spilled paint. By the third, the smell had started. By the fourth, insects had found her. By the fifth, I opened every window in the house. By the sixth, I stopped eating in the kitchen. By the seventh, the smell had become part of the house itself. That morning, after another night of cold air pressing through the open bedroom window, I finally kicked the blankets down to the bottom of the mattress and got up. My joints ached. My mouth was dry. My head felt heavy from lack of proper sleep and too much whiskey. I went downstairs. She was still there. Of course she was. Several insects moved across what remained of her, crawling in and out of places I refused to look at for too long. I was glad I had stomped 8 times. It meant I didn't have to see her face anymore. There was no expression left to accuse me. No eyes staring. No mouth frozen around a final word. Just a crushed, ruined tangle of dark red and rotting brown. The morning sun filled the kitchen with warm light spreading over the counters and floor like butter melting across bread. But she was still in shadow, slumped under the cabinets where she had fallen. It almost looked deliberate, as if the house itself had decided she did not deserve light. I fixed myself a drink. The bottle was nearly empty, but there were others. There were always others. I carried the glass upstairs and decided finally to close the bedroom window. The air had become too cold to sleep through. I could handle the smell being a little stronger if it meant I didn't have to wrap myself like a corpse just to stay warm. I shut the window, finished most of my drink, and lay down again. I don't remember falling asleep. When I woke, the room was dark. Night had come. For a moment, I didn't move. I stared at the ceiling, listening. Something had woken me, but I didn't know what. The house was still, the bedroom door was closed, the blankets were twisted around my legs. Then I heard it again. A long scrape. Slow. Shrill. It came from downstairs. I sat up annoyed before I was afraid. That was the problem with leaving windows open, I told myself. Some animal had gotten inside. A raccoon, maybe. A stray cat. Something hungry, drawn in by the smell. Maybe it had found her and was dragging pieces across the kitchen floor. The thought irritated me more than it disturbed me. Whatever it was, it had to go. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood. The floorboards were cold beneath my bare feet. I huffed under my breath as I walked to the bedroom door and opened it. The hallway was black. I went down the stairs slowly, one hand trailing along the wall. At the bottom, I turned toward the living room first and flicked on the light. The bulb hummed and filled the room with a weak yellow glow. Nothing moved. The sofa sat where it always had. The old coffee table was cluttered with bottles, books, and ash. The curtains lifted slightly in the draft from the open windows. I stepped farther in, ready to search properly. Then another scrape split the silence. This one was louder. It was so sharp that I flinched, my shoulders rising toward my ears. The sound seemed to claw through the walls and into my skull. There was no mistaking where it came from. The kitchen. I turned slowly. For a few seconds, I stood in the doorway between the living room and hall, listening. Nothing. Then I walked toward the kitchen. The light was already on from earlier. It spilled across the floor, over the dried blood, over the broken glass, over the dark stains where she had been lying for 7 days. But she was gone. I stopped. The empty space beneath the cabinet stared back at me. The blood was there. The glass was there. The insects were still scattered around the floor, crawling through the stains, confused by the absence of what had fed them. But she was not there. I stared at the place where her body should have been. My first thought was that an animal had dragged her away. But that made no sense. No animal small enough to slip through a window could move a body like that. Not without noise, not without leaving a trail. Then I heard another scrape, quieter this time, muffled. It seemed to come from every direction at once, behind the walls, under the floor, above the ceiling. I took one step back, then another. I could feel something cold moving through my stomach, but I did not let it become fear. Not fully. I told myself I was tired. I told myself the smell, the whiskey, and the guilt had twisted my senses. After a moment, I turned around and decided to go back to bed. That sounds insane now, but at the time it felt like the only reasonable choice. I didn't want to search the house. I didn't want to know whatever had happened could wait until morning. Most things look less impossible in daylight. I moved through the living room with my eyes fixed on the floor. When I reached the stairs, I placed one foot on the first step. Behind me, at the bottom of the staircase, the floor creaked. Not gently. It screamed under pressure. I froze. Another step creaked, then the next. Someone was behind me. Climbing. I did not look back. Something deep inside me took control of my legs and made me keep moving. Slowly at first, then faster. I climbed the stairs with the sound following behind me. One step, then another, then another. The old wood groaned under weight that was not mine. By the time I reached the bedroom, my breath was shallow. I stepped inside and slammed the door behind me. The footsteps stopped outside. For a moment, I stood there with my back pressed to the door, waiting. Nothing happened. No scratching, no knocking, no voice. Just silence. Strangely, I did not feel like she wanted to hurt me. That sounds ridiculous considering what happened after, but it is true. I had the sudden, awful feeling that she only wanted to watch, to stand nearby and observe me the way I had watched her die. I crossed the room and lay down on the bed. My body was stiff and straight on the mattress. I closed my eyes. I told myself to sleep. I told myself none of this was real. I told myself I would wake in the morning and the body would be in the kitchen again, and I would find some rational explanation. Then the bedroom door opened. It hit the wall with a loud thud, swung so hard that the sound moved through the room like a gunshot. I kept my eyes shut. Something entered. The smell came first, stronger than before. Rot and wet cloth and old blood. Then the sound of her breathing, heaving, gurgling, thick as if every breath had to pass through fluid. I heard her move across the bedroom floor. Her steps were slow and uneven. Something dragged behind her with every movement, making that same scraping sound. She came to the end of the bed. I did not open my eyes, not when the mattress shifted slightly, not when the smell leaned over me, not when her breathing filled the room so completely that I could hear nothing else. I lay there, eyes closed, hands gripping the sheets beneath the blankets. The breathing stayed at the foot of the bed for a long time. Then, sometime before morning, it stopped. When daylight finally came, she was gone from the room. The bedroom door remained open. That small detail almost made me laugh. She had always left doors open. Closet doors, kitchen cabinets, bedroom doors. I used to complain about it constantly. I used to tell her she was incapable of closing anything behind her. And now, even dead, she had left the door open. I got out of bed. The house felt different in daylight, but not better. The air was too still. The smell was weaker upstairs, but stronger below. I walked down slowly, every step careful. The kitchen was still missing a corpse. I stood in the same spot I had stood the night before, staring at the empty place under the cabinets. Nothing. No body, no trail. No explanation. For a moment, I considered searching the house, the pantry, the closets, the basement, the rooms we didn't use anymore. But then I decided against it. If she wanted to hide, let her hide. If she wanted to move, let her move. I stepped farther into the kitchen and fixed myself another drink. My hands were steady as I poured the amber liquid into the glass. I told myself that meant something. A guilty man would shake. A frightened man would shake. I was neither, I decided. I was tired, that was all. The glass filled halfway, then hot breath touched the back of my neck. I stopped pouring. The gurgling wheeze came next, closer than it had been the night before. Wet, slow, patient. I could feel the warmth of her breath moving against my skin. She was standing directly behind me. I lifted the glass, took a sip. The whiskey burned down my throat. I waited for her to go away. She did not. Her breath stayed on my neck. In the reflection of the kitchen window, I could see a shape behind me. Not clearly, just enough. Something bent and ruined, standing too close. Something with one hand raised, hovering near my shoulder, but not touching. I kept my eyes on the glass. "I killed you," I said quietly. The breathing hitched. For the first time, I heard something almost like a voice inside it. Not a word, a wet, broken attempt at one. I took another sip. I know what I did. A drop of something cold fell onto the back of my shirt. Then another. I did not turn around. Turning around would make it real in a way I was not ready for. For the rest of the day, she followed me. Never touching. Never speaking clearly. Only breathing. When I sat in the living room, she stood in the hallway. When I went upstairs, she climbed behind me. When I closed a door, she opened it. When I walked past a mirror, I saw pieces of her in the glass, a broken forehead, a shoulder caved inward, hair stiff with dried blood, an eye that no longer sat where it should. By evening, I had finished the bottle. By night, I had opened another. The house had grown colder, even with every window shut. The walls seemed damp to the touch. The smell had changed, too. It was no longer only the smell of death. It was the smell of wet earth, like a grave freshly opened after rain. I went to bed without turning off the lights. She stood at the foot of the bed again. This time, I opened my eyes. I don't know why. Maybe the whiskey made me brave. Maybe exhaustion had worn down the last part of me that still cared. Maybe I wanted to prove she was only some sickness in my head. She was there. What remained of her stood in the yellow bedroom light. Her body was bent strangely, like the bones had healed wrong, even though they had never healed at all. Her nightdress was dark with old blood and rot. Pieces of glass still glittered in her forehead and cheek. Insects moved through her hair. Her face was mostly destroyed, just as I had left it, but somehow I knew she was looking at me. I smiled at her. I don't know why I did that either. Maybe cruelty becomes habit. "You always did like attention," I muttered. She opened her mouth. The sound that came out was not a scream. It was a laugh, not loud, not full. A wet little laugh that bubbled through broken teeth and ruined flesh. The smile left my face. She raised one foot and placed it on the mattress, then the other. Slowly, impossibly, she crawled onto the bed. I tried to move then. I really did, but my body would not obey me. She climbed over the blankets, dragging herself closer until her ruined face hovered above mine. The smell was so strong my eyes watered. Her mouth opened again. This time I understood the word 8. My heart stopped. She lifted one broken hand. Her fingers pressed against my chest. Not hard, almost gently. Then she pushed. The force threw me into darkness. When I woke, I was downstairs. I was lying on the kitchen floor. For a moment, I could not move. My head throbbed. My mouth tasted like blood and whiskey. My body ached as if I had fallen down the stairs. Then I noticed the position. I was lying beneath the cabinets, exactly where she had been. The broken glass surrounded me. The old blood stained the floor beneath my cheek. I tried to sit up, but something held me down. Not hands, not rope. Weight, pressure. The kind of pressure roots might make if they grew around a buried thing for a very long time. I heard footsteps above me. Slow, heavy. My boots. Someone was walking upstairs in my boots. The steps crossed the bedroom, paused, then started down the stairs. Thud, thud, thud. I tried to scream, but my mouth filled with something thick and black. The footsteps entered the kitchen. I could not turn my head enough to see her, but I felt her standing over me. I felt the shadow of her body block the light. Then I heard my own voice above me, not hers. Mine, calm, cold, almost amused. One, a boot came down on my ribs. Pain burst through me. Two, I screamed then, or tried to, but only a wet choking sound came out. Three, I understood what she had been waiting for, not revenge. Balance. Four, bone cracked. Five, the kitchen light flickered. Six, somewhere above, a door swung open and hit the wall. Seven, I saw her face then, reflected in a shard of glass near my cheek. She was smiling, though there was almost nothing left to smile with. Eight, after that, there was only the smell. Rot, blood, wet earth, and the cold breeze from a window I was certain I had closed. Story 5. I have to admit something about myself that I have never been proud of. As a human being, I think my greatest sin has always been my hunger for knowledge. Not normal curiosity, not the healthy kind that makes someone read books or ask questions. I mean the kind of hunger that pulls at you even when you know you should stop. The kind that makes a locked door feel like an invitation. The kind that makes a warning feel like a challenge. Even when I was a child, that part of me caused trouble. When I was 5 years old, I ran away into the forest near our home because I had seen colored ribbons tied to branches along a trail. They were only trail markers for joggers, but I didn't know that. To me, they looked like clues, little bright messages leading somewhere important. My mother found me not long after I wandered off, thankfully, and when she asked why I had run into the woods alone, I told her I wanted to know where the ribbons led. That answer made sense to me then. It still does now, in a way. But what I need to talk about today is not innocent like a child chasing ribbons through trees. What I did was reckless, more than reckless, maybe. I followed something I should have left alone, and now I am not sure how much of myself came back. I have always been fascinated by mysteries, especially the occult. There is something about the occult that feels different from ordinary history or science. It feels untouchable, hidden, like it sits just outside the edge of human understanding, waiting for someone foolish enough to reach toward it. Anyone can watch videos online about haunted objects, cursed places, old rituals, and strange disappearances, but watching is never the same as taking part. Reading about mysteries is not the same as standing in front of one and feeling it breathe. I wanted something real. My life had become dull in the way adult life often becomes dull. Work, sleep, bills, meaningless conversations, repeat. The world felt gray, and I wanted to fill it with something that belonged only to me. A hobby, I suppose, though that word feels far too harmless now. So I searched the internet. At first, I looked for occult objects. I visited websites selling talismans, old coins, haunted dolls, cursed rings, fragments of bones, and so-called ancient artifacts. Most of it looked fake. Some of it was expensive, but nothing about it felt powerful. Nothing pulled me in. Then, I found rituals. That changed everything. Rituals fascinated me because they were not just objects to look at. They were actions, instructions, recipes almost. You could recreate them at home if you followed the steps correctly. Light this candle, draw this symbol, say these words, stand before a mirror, wait until midnight, don't turn around, don't speak after the knocking starts. It was absurd, and I knew that. I knew most of them would not work. I am not a fool in that way. But I was still curious enough to try them because even the smallest chance was enough. If one ritual out of 1,000 worked, then the world was not what I thought it was. And if the world was not what I thought it was, then maybe life was not as gray as it seemed. My first ritual was the same one almost everyone tries at some point: Bloody Mary. Most people know the childish version, but I researched its older meaning too. Originally, it was a kind of divination. Young women were supposed to see the face of their future husband in the mirror. If they saw a skull or the Grim Reaper instead, it meant they would die before marriage. I stood in front of my mirror and called the name 3 times. After the third call, I opened my eyes. In the reflection, I saw a man. He looked exhausted, slouched, disheveled. His hair was a mess and his face looked pale in the bathroom light. For a second, my heart jumped. Then I realized I was looking at myself. I remember thinking that the man in the mirror should really go to bed. That ritual was a failure. I brushed my teeth, went to sleep, and wondered lazily if Bloody Mary only worked for women. After that, I started trying more. Some rituals were short and childish. Others were long and complicated. Some required specific times, specific moon phases, specific objects, or strange phrases spoken in certain ways. Some included warnings about what might happen if the ritual failed. Others warned what might happen if it succeeded. None of them worked. Not once. Still, I continued. At first, I kept going because I hoped one might finally prove itself. Later, I kept going because the routine itself became part of my life. Researching rituals, preparing for them, reading strange forums, comparing variations, making notes. It gave structure to my evenings. It gave my life a little strangeness. Even disappointment became familiar. The rituals grew darker over time. That tends to happen when you keep digging. The harmless mirror games led to candle rituals. The candle rituals led to offerings. The offerings led to old names, closed rooms, abandoned buildings, crossroads, cemeteries, and warnings written in capital letters by people who claimed to know better. Still, nothing happened. Every failure made me a little less afraid. That may have been the most dangerous part. One night, after another failed ritual, I decided on a whim to try Bloody Mary again. I don't know why. Maybe nostalgia. Maybe irritation. Maybe some childish part of me wanted to return to where this obsession had started. I stood before the mirror and called her name 3 times. After the third call, I opened my eyes. This time, the man in the reflection was not me. I did not recognize him. He had a beard that looked like it had not seen a razor in weeks. His eyes were empty and deeply sunken, surrounded by dark circles so heavy they almost looked bruised. His head was bald, his skin had the dull gray look of someone who had not slept, eaten, or lived properly for a very long time. He forced a smile. Then he disappeared. The next morning came softly, like a worried mother opening a bedroom door. I woke feeling wrong. That was the first moment I truly considered taking a break. Not from work, but from my life, from my apartment, from the rituals, from the strange feeling that something had finally answered me, and I had not liked the answer. So I decided to go on a road trip toward my hometown. I told myself it would be good for me. A few days away, old scenery, fresh air, and of course, a chance to visit some spiritual shops along the way. Maybe I could find books with rituals I had not seen online. Maybe I could find something rare. Even after what I had seen in the mirror, I was excited. That should tell you everything about the kind of person I am. I packed my luggage, booked a hotel, planned my route, and marked 7 spiritual shops I wanted to visit. The first shop was disappointing. It had crystals, tarot cards, little gongs, incense burners, talismans, and shelves full of decorative nonsense, but no real ritual books. Nothing that felt important. I left quickly and continued to the next shop. The second shop looked similar at first. More crystals, more cards, more carved stones and little statues sold to people who wanted spirituality without danger. But there were books. They stood behind the woman at the counter, locked inside a glass display case. There were 13 of them. They were arranged by color, from lightest to darkest. The first book was bright white, almost painfully clean. Each book, after it became slightly darker, gray, deeper gray, brown, near black. The 13th book was covered in something so dark it barely looked like a color at all. It looked like the absence of color, like a piece of a room where no light had ever touched. None of the books had titles on their spines, only numbers, 1 through 13. I could not stop staring at number 13. Eventually, I asked the woman behind the counter how much it cost. She looked at me for a moment before answering. "I'm sorry, sir, but I cannot sell you that book." "Why not?" I asked. "They are display pieces," she said. "They are not for sale." I nodded as if I understood, but I didn't. Then I left the shop feeling strangely defeated. During the drive to the next store, I could not stop thinking about those books. Especially the last one. That black cover did not feel like leather or cloth. It felt like something impossible. I had never seen a black that deep before. The third shop had nothing. The fourth had nothing. The fifth had books, but none that interested me. They all looked ordinary, printed for people who wanted to feel mysterious for $20. Then I reached the sixth shop, and there they were again, the same 13 books. This time, they were not locked away. They stood behind the counter on an ordinary shelf in a neat row, arranged from white to black exactly as before. I knew immediately that I had to leave with one. The old woman behind the counter watched me look at them. "What would you like for the book?" I asked, pointing to number 13. "Nothing," she said. I thought I had misheard her. "Nothing? Aren't they valuable?" The old woman's expression did not change. "In a few days, you will bring it back. Everyone does." I should have listened to the sadness in her voice. Instead, I thanked her with more energy than I had felt in years. I tucked the black book under my arm and left the shop while she watched me with tired, mournful eyes. Once I had the book, I no longer cared about the seventh shop. All I wanted was to get to my hotel and open it. I was so nervous during the drive that I had trouble focusing on the road. My mind kept circling around the same questions. What was inside? Who wrote it? Where did it come from? Was it truly a ritual book, or something else entirely? That was when it struck me. I knew nothing about the book, no author, no title, no markings except the number, no origin, no explanation, nothing. When I reached the hotel, I placed the book on the nightstand. I stood over it for a long time, wanting to open it and afraid to open it. I was not afraid of danger, not yet. I was afraid of disappointment. I was afraid that after all that excitement, the book would contain blank pages or cheap poetry or meaningless symbols designed to trick people like me. So I decided to walk first. The hotel was near the forest where I used to play as a child, the same forest where I once chased trail ribbons. It felt fitting in a way. I changed my clothes and went out. It was a beautiful day. The sun was warm. Birds sang in the trees, their voices overlapping like a little choir. The familiar paths filled me with a strange comfort. As I walked, my nervousness faded, and I decided that when I returned, I would open the book and accept whatever I found. Halfway through the route, I noticed something. No one had passed me. That was strange because the trail was popular, especially with dog walkers. Even on quiet days, I would usually see at least a few people. But now there was no one. Then the birds stopped. Completely. The forest became so silent that the only sound left was the crunch of my shoes pressing down on dry beech leaves. I stood still for a moment, listening to that silence, and thought of my childhood self following ribbons into the trees without fear. This time, I found my way back to the hotel. The book was waiting on the nightstand. I sat on the floor and opened it. There was no title page, no introduction, no table of contents. The first page showed an illustration of a bound man lying helpless while an eagle tore into his liver. Prometheus, I thought, or something like him. I turned the page. The next page looked like ancient papyrus, rough and yellowed, but there was nothing written on it. I turned another page. This one was different again, thicker, pale. Almost waxy. Another page felt like fabric, another like thin bark, another like something I did not want to identify. Every page was made from a different material. Every page was blank. I sat there wondering what to do. Should I return it to the old woman? Was the book itself the mystery? The first illustration had to mean something. The changing pages had to mean something. A book with no author, no origin, and no words could not simply be nothing. Then a thought entered my mind. Should the book itself be used as part of a ritual? The moment I thought that, something opened inside me. Not a memory. Not exactly. A wave of knowledge rushed into me so suddenly that I almost gasped. I knew what had to be done. The structure, the formula, the preparations, the timing, the offerings, the placement of the book, everything arrived complete, as if I had always known it but had only just remembered. I will not describe the ritual in detail. I will not give anyone enough information to try it. All I will say is that I drew a circular symbol on the floor with chalk. I placed a candle at the center. Behind it, I arranged offerings in a bowl. Then I laid the book before me and opened it to the illustration of the bound man and the eagle. To begin, I lit the offerings with the candle flame. I did this at noon, when the sun was at its highest point. At first, nothing happened. For several minutes, I sat there feeling foolish. The room smelled faintly of smoke and burned offerings. The candle flame flickered. My knees began to ache. Then the book moved. A page turned by itself. My entire body went cold. After all those rituals, after all those failures, something had finally answered. Letters began appearing on the blank page. First, one. Then another. Then words. Then sentences. I leaned forward and read, "You have 130 minutes to study the knowledge of the world. Every worldly question shall receive its answer." I cannot describe what I felt in that moment. Joy, terror, victory, hunger, mostly hunger. I began asking questions, at first small ones. Historical questions, mysteries I had always wondered about. The book answered them plainly. Then I asked larger questions. Questions about the future, questions about lost civilizations, questions about deaths, disappearances, hidden crimes, forgotten places, and truths buried beneath official stories. The answers appeared page after page, and I read with the desperation of a starving man at a feast. Time passed quickly, too quickly. Eventually, I noticed the candle had burned almost down to the floor. The flame was tiny now, barely alive. I knew I had little time left. I should have stopped. I should have closed the book and ended the ritual while I still could. But I had one more question. The one I should never have asked. Who created the 13 books, I said. Where do they come from? No answer appeared. Only silence. The candle still burned, so the ritual was not over. I asked again, who created the 13 books, and where do they come from? The book turned to a page I had not noticed before. It was black. Not black like ink or paper. Black like a hole cut into the world. It looked like shadow itself, though there was no way a shadow could be cast there in that light. I stared at it. What kind of page is this? I whispered. No answer. Then I saw the candle go out. The time had run out. Something began rising from the blackness of the page. The moment it broke through, all sound vanished. Not just the room, not just the outside world. My own breathing disappeared. I could not hear my heartbeat. I could not hear my blood in my ears. A finger emerged first. Long, dark, prisoner thin. When the second finger appeared, I lost my sense of smell. The smoke from the offerings disappeared. The scent of the extinguished candle vanished. The third finger took the feeling from my body. The fourth took taste. The fifth took my sight. I sat there as nothing more than a hollow shell locked inside myself. I wanted to run. I could not. I wanted to scream. I could not. I was a child again, sitting helpless while an adult scolded me for chasing colored ribbons too far into the woods. Then I felt a burning hand close around my wrist. And suddenly, I felt everything. Everything. Not only my own fear, but the feelings of countless others. I felt the joy of people finding eternal love. I felt the betrayal between childhood friends who had been laughing together only moments before. I felt the grief of a father who lost his family in a car accident, and at the same time I felt the pain of the wife and child as they died. I felt hunger, birth, murder, forgiveness, loneliness, jealousy, prayer, hatred, relief, shame, lust, devotion, madness. Every human feeling that had ever been hidden from me, every feeling I had never understood deeply enough, entered me at once. It was too much, far too much. All I could think was, how much longer? Then everything went dark. When light returned, I was no longer in my hotel room. I saw a family. A mother and daughter stood before a small gravestone in a cemetery. The air smelled of lilies, my favorite flowers. They reminded me of my grandmother of childhood afternoons in her garden. The sun touched my skin. Summer sat sweet on my tongue. The vision felt real, more real than my own body. The grave had no name, only an epitaph. Knowledge does not protect you from death either. By the time death knocks at your door, you have already moved out. Then I woke. Moonlight streamed through the hotel window and fell across my face. My whole body trembled. I looked down at my wrist and saw a scar wrapped around it in the shape of a chain. The room was quiet. The book was gone too. I staggered into the bathroom and looked in the mirror. I looked like I had not slept in days. My face was hollow. My eyes were sunken. For a moment I thought of the disheveled man I had seen during the second Bloody Mary ritual. Then I understood. Or maybe I only feared that I did. I wanted to sleep, but I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt that burning hand again. I felt all those lives, all those deaths, all those emotions crashing through me. Since sleep was impossible and the roads would be empty, I decided to drive home. That was when I realized my car keys were missing. I searched the hotel room in a panic and eventually found them near the entrance door. I know I had not left them there. When I went outside, my car was parked in a different space than where I remembered leaving it. I stood in the parking lot, staring at it. What had happened while I was unconscious? What had I done? On the way home, I decided to stop by the 2 shops where I had seen the 13 books. I knew it was late. I knew they would be closed, but I thought I might shine my phone light through the window and at least see whether the other books were still there. When I reached the first shop, it was empty, not closed. Empty. The shelves were bare. The counter was gone. The display case was gone. There was not a single crystal, card, talisman, or book anywhere inside. Even the dust seemed to have been wiped away. I drove to the second shop. The same thing. Empty. Completely clean. No books. No old woman. No proof that anything had ever been there. I stood outside with my flashlight pointed through the glass, feeling the scar around my wrist burn softly. And for the first time in my life, I did not want to know more. Story 6. I am the cold space between the stars. I am the darkness you cannot touch, the weight you cannot measure, the pressure you feel on the back of your neck when the lights go out and the room becomes too quiet. For a long time, you thought I was only a reflection. You thought I was a shadow left behind by a dying town. You thought I had been shaped by a scarred, proud man who believed he could control me. He found me in the deep places. He touched a piece of what I am. He thought that made him powerful. He thought he became a god, but he was never a god. He was only a vessel, a cup, a hollow thing waiting to be filled. And when the frightened, furious mother finally cut his head from his shoulders, I did not grieve for him. I did not scream. I did not die with him. I simply spilled out. Today is April 25th, 2026. It has been years since the fire, years since the soldiers, tired and wounded but still brave enough to stand, set their trap. Years since the bomb ticked down and the mirror world collapsed into dust. Years since the children escaped, gasping and bleeding, into a world that still had sunlight. They think it is over. That is the funniest part. They really think they won. I watch them now, not from a throne, not from a hidden palace under the earth. I do not need those things anymore. I watch them through the static on their televisions, through the black spaces between phone signals, through the slow decay of autumn leaves. I watch from dark windows and cold mirrors and the brief flicker of streetlights just before they fail. I watch the boy who was once my tether, the little sorcerer. The child who dared to pull at my strings and thought he understood the shape of power. He walks under the sun now. He smiles beside a new companion. He laughs like his hands were never stained by the impossible. He pretends he is free. I watch the others, too. They have grown older. They have left their childhoods behind like old clothes that no longer fit. They toss graduation caps into the air. They move into cities. They take jobs. They fall in love. They sit in bright rooms and tell themselves the rot in their lungs was only a nightmare from another life. They are good at pretending. Humans always are. The storyteller still gathers them around the table. He still rolls dice, still builds brave little worlds from paper, pencils, and hope. He spins stories where the lost girl is somewhere beautiful, somewhere warm, somewhere safe. He tells himself she is in the sun. He lies because the truth would make his hands shake too badly to hold the dice, because she is not in the sun. When she chose to stay behind, when she let the illusionist cover her trail and lock the door from the outside, she did not step into peace. She stepped into the void. She stepped into me. For years, she has held the membrane closed. Do you understand what that means? A child, then a girl, now something stretched thin between worlds, has stood against an ocean of cosmic pressure. Her mind has become a wall. Her will has become a lock. Her pain has become the final seal between your warm little world and everything waiting outside it. She has been strong, so much stronger than any of them know. But even strong things break. Even stone wears away under enough water. Even stars collapse. I can feel her exhaustion now. The blood no longer drips. It pours. She is so tired. And the void is so cold. They believed they destroyed my world, but they were wrong. They only destroyed the quarantine. They only shattered the small mirrored cage built around a quiet Midwestern town. They burned the room and thought they had burned the house. But I was never only there. I am older than streets, older than names, older than the first frightened child who looked into a dark mirror and wondered what might be looking back. I am no longer trapped in those mirrored roads and dead houses. I am drifting now, slow and patient, through cosmic ash. I seep into roots. I gather in corners. I press against the weak places in the real world and wait for them to soften. Today, April 25th, 2026, the first crack formed. It was small, no one noticed. A child's reflection blinked half a second too late. A radio whispered in a dead language between stations. A woman dreamed of a red door floating in black water and woke with frost on her sheets. Small things. Beginning things. Enjoy your families while you can. Enjoy your settled lives, your new jobs, your bright kitchens, your morning coffee, your ordinary little loves. Hold each other close and pretend the world is solid beneath your feet. The girl is finally closing her eyes, and when she sleeps, the mirror will shatter completely. I am not gone. I was never gone. I have only been waiting for the door to open. Story 7. The real horror of working the graveyard shift at a toll plaza isn't getting robbed or freezing in a booth that was built to save money, not keep people warm. The real fear is the isolation. It's the feeling that the world has shut down and you're the only person still awake, sitting in a worn-out chair while the highway stretches into darkness on both sides like it could go on forever. My name is Roberto, but everyone at the highway agency calls me Beto. I work nights at the KM 214 Toll Plaza on the Saravel Highway, an infamous stretch of road in southern Brazil. The highway cuts through a valley surrounded by steep rainforest mountains. At night, the trees become a single black wall and the fog rolls down the slopes like smoke. There aren't any towns nearby, not within 25 miles in either direction. No gas stations, No rest stops, no lights except what we keep on at the plaza. Just asphalt cutting through wet forest, and the occasional truck trying to make good time before the fog gets too thick. The plaza has 8 booths, but during the midnight to 6 a.m. shift, we only keep 2 open. Booth 1 on the far left, where my coworker Silas worked, and Booth 8 on the far right, where I worked. Booth 8 is the most isolated one. It sits close to the dirt shoulder and the weeds, almost pushed off to the edge like an afterthought. Technically, it's meant for oversized vehicles, the wide loads and heavy rigs that need the extra clearance, but in the middle of the night, anyone who shows up goes where they want. When traffic is dead and visibility is bad, people pick the lane with the least hassle. That night was a Tuesday. Traffic was almost nothing. Around 1 a.m., the fog got so thick it looked solid, like a wall of dirty cotton. Visibility dropped to maybe 30 feet, and even that felt generous. The canopy lights above the toll lanes could barely cut through it. I couldn't see the far end of my own lane. I couldn't even see Silas across the plaza. Normally, even in bad weather, you can spot the glow of Booth 1 like a little square of light. Not that night. He could have been a mile away. The only connection we had was the two-way radio clipped to my belt, and even that would sometimes hiss with static because of the weather in the mountains. The hours were slow enough to feel unreal. I had a crossword puzzle open, a lukewarm coffee that tasted like burned plastic, and my small electric heater humming under the desk. I kept shifting in my chair, trying to stay alert. The worst thing about that job wasn't fear, it was how easy it was to drift off for a second and wake up disoriented, convinced you'd missed something important. At 2:14 a.m., the routine broke. I heard it before I saw it, muffled by fog and distance. An old engine sputtering like it was misfiring on 1 or 2 cylinders. It wasn't loud, just persistent, the kind of sound that cuts through quiet because it doesn't belong there. I sat up and looked down the lane. 2 yellowish beams appeared in the mist and pushed forward slowly. One headlight was tilted higher than the other, aiming slightly up as if the housing had been knocked loose. The car crept toward my booth with tires making that soft, wet sound on damp asphalt. Then it stopped right beside booth 8. It was an old sedan, early 90s. A Chevy Monza. The color was hard to read under the lights and fog, either dark blue or black. But the paint was faded, and the roof looked sun-damaged. The driver's door had a deep scrape and dent along it, like it had sideswiped a concrete barrier hard enough to leave a scar. One of the hubcaps was missing. It looked like a car that had lived a hard life. The driver rolled the window down. It was manual, and I could hear the slow, ugly screech of the crank turning, metal grinding metal. That sound made me tense in a way I didn't understand until later. It was the kind of noise you'd expect in daylight in a parking lot, not out here in the fog where everything felt muted and wrong. "Good evening, 960, I said, switching on my toll worker voice. Flat, polite, automatic. I reached my hand out through the little opening beside the glass. The driver didn't answer. I couldn't see his face clearly. He wore a dark baseball cap pulled low and a leather jacket with the collar turned up around his neck. He kept his head angled down like he didn't want the booth light on him. The only part of him the fluorescent light really caught was his hand as it extended toward mine. He held out a 20-real bill folded in half. When my fingers touched the note to take it, I accidentally grazed his skin. The contact was brief, less than a second. But my body reacted like I'd touched something rotten. His skin was slick, not sweaty, not oily, but slimy, like something that had been soaking in dirty water. I jerked my hand back and snatched the bill. The money was wet, too, coated in the same thick film, and there was a jagged tear down the middle of the printed face. A rough rip, like it had been pulled apart and forced back together. I stared into the dark cabin, trying to make sense of what I was feeling. "Just a minute. Getting your change," I muttered. My voice sounded small inside the booth. I wiped the bill on my pants before dropping it into the cash drawer. The smell coming off it was sharp and foul, like old river mud mixed with something metallic. I grabbed a 10-real bill and some coins, then held them out. The driver's hand took the change without a word. "No thanks." No nod. Nothing. The window started to roll up again, slow and screeching. I pressed the green button. The barrier arm lifted. The Monza jerked into first gear, coughed twice, and rolled forward. Within a few yards, it vanished into the fog. The tail lights disappeared like they'd been swallowed. I rubbed my hands together hard, as if friction could erase the feeling of that skin. In that job, you meet all kinds of people at night. Truckers on stimulants who haven't slept in days, couples fighting, drivers who won't make eye contact, drivers who talk too much. I told myself it was just another late-night weirdo and tried to go back to my crossword. The minutes dragged. 3 o'clock, 3:15, 3:30. No cars. Nothing. The fog thickened until I couldn't even see the barrier arm 3 feet from my window. It felt like sitting inside a cloud. Sometimes I thought I saw shapes shift out there, but when I focused, there was only mist and light glare. At 3:42 a.m., the sound returned. That same sputtering engine, the same wet tires. I looked up, annoyed at first, then confused. The crooked headlight beam cut through the fog again, approaching my lane at the same slow pace as before. The car eased to a stop beside Booth 8 like it was repeating a routine. It was the Monza, the exact same car, same dent, same faded roof, same misaligned headlight. My brain stalled. The KM 214 toll plaza isn't near a convenient turnaround. If you pass through heading north, the direction I was charging, there's no official return point for 28 miles. Not until you reach Sao Lazaro. For this car to come back, the driver would have had to drive all the way to town, turn around, drive back south through another toll point, find yet another turnaround farther out, then come back north to me. And he would have had to do it fast. Too fast, especially in that fog, with an engine that sounded like it was dying. It didn't add up, not even close. "What the hell?" I whispered. The window rolled down again with the same grinding shriek, and this time the smell hit me before I even spoke. It filled my booth like a physical thing. It wasn't just unpleasant, it was overwhelming. Rot and sludge, thick enough to make me gag. I pulled my sweater sleeve over my nose and mouth, eyes watering. A hand came out of the darkness. I stared at it because I couldn't not. The leather jacket sleeve was torn, shredded at the cuff. The skin of the hand was gray-green, swollen and bloated, and dark veins stood out beneath it like thick cords. The fingernails were cracked and packed with mud. He held a bill out toward me. Every instinct in me screamed to keep my hands inside and lock the window, but toll work teaches you a kind of blind obedience. You take the money, you give the change. You lift the gate, you move the next vehicle along. The routine is built to override thought. I held my breath and reached out with just 2 fingers, trying not to touch him, and pinched the bill from his grip. His hand vanished back into the car like something retracting into a hole. Under the harsh booth light, I looked at the bill, another 20-real note, soaked in dark, viscous fluid, and when I turned it, I saw the same jagged tear in the same place. A cold shock went through me. I pulled open the cash drawer with shaking hands. The first 20-real bill he'd given me earlier sat right on top of the stack. I grabbed it, then held it beside the one I'd just taken. I compared the serial numbers. They were identical. It was the same bill. I looked into the car again, and this time the driver's head turned slowly toward me. Under the cap's shadow, where his eyes should have been, I saw only a wet glint catching the booth light. Mud streaked down the side of his face into the collar of his jacket. His jaw hung wrong, loose and slightly pulled to one side, as if it had been dislocated and never put back. It was an angle no living person could stand. I panicked. I didn't count the change. I didn't speak. I just threw the bills and coins onto the passenger seat through the open window, slammed my palm onto the green button, and stumbled backward until my spine hit the fiberglass wall. The Monza didn't drive off right away. It sat there for 5 endless seconds. Engine coughing. I heard water dripping from somewhere under the car, plinking steadily onto the asphalt. And from inside that dark cabin, I heard a sound like a gurgling sigh, like someone trying to breathe through a tube filled with wet dirt. Then the car jerked forward and disappeared into the fog again, swallowed whole. I lunged to the booth door and locked the deadbolt. My legs were shaking so hard I could barely stand. I collapsed into the chair, heart slamming in my chest. The smell stayed. It clung to the booth, to my clothes, to my throat. It felt like I'd inhaled it and it had coated my lungs. I fumbled for the radio on my belt and pressed the button. Silas? Silas, do you copy? Booth 1, respond, I said, my voice cracking. Static hissed. A moment later, Silas's voice came through, bored and tired. I copy, Beto. Why are you yelling? What happened? Did you see the car that just passed? I asked. Old dark Monza, busted headlight, dented driver door. Did it go through your side? Did you see it turn around somewhere? Beto, no one's passed through here in over 2 hours. This fog is insane. I can't even see the plaza sign. Are you sure you didn't doze off? It came through my booth, I said. Twice. It's the same car, the same cash, the same bill, Silas. Same serial number. And the driver, he smells like a corpse. Something is wrong. Silence on the radio. The kind of silence where you can tell someone is deciding whether to laugh it off or take you seriously. Silas knew I wasn't the type to prank. Night shift eats humor fast. Okay, he said finally. Quieter. Lock your door. I'm going to call Highway Patrol. The operational base is 3 miles down. Did you get the plate from the monitor? I looked up at the system screen. Every transaction triggers a camera that captures the plate. My hands were still shaking, but I forced myself to read it. KJN 4091, I said. Plate from Paraná. Copy KJN 4091, Silas replied. Stay inside your booth. Don't open the door for anyone. I set the radio down and stared at the cash drawer. The 220s, identical serial numbers, sat there side by side, both smeared with muddy slime. I didn't want to touch them again. I used my pen to push them to the back of the drawer like they were poisonous. At 4:25 a.m., the radio hissed hard and made me jump. Beto, a new voice said, this is Sergeant Matthias with Highway Patrol. Silas asked me to speak to you directly. Over. Relief hit me so fast I almost cried. This is Roberto. Sergeant, thank God. Did you find the Monza? It was heading north. The sergeant's voice was heavy, stripped of the normal confidence cops use when they want you calm. Roberto, I need you to listen carefully. Are you absolutely sure the plate was KJN? And you're sure it was a Monza with a dented door? Yes, I said immediately. The camera got it. I saw it. He came through twice. It's not a matter of finding him, Matthias said, and there was a burst of static that sounded like a long exhale. We ran the plate and checked the incident logs. Vehicle KJN 4091 was in a fatal accident tonight around 11:45 p.m. Driver lost control in the rain, hit the concrete barrier, broke through, and went off the viaduct at kilometer 190. My mind refused to accept the sentence. Kilometer 190 was 15 miles before my toll plaza. What do you mean, off the viaduct? I asked. What time did you say? Before midnight, he answered. Rescue is still down in the ravine. The car is upside down, submerged in mud up to the roof. They cut through the wreckage to pull the driver out. Coroner called it at the scene. Crushed skull against the steering column. He was underwater for hours. I slid down onto the booth floor like my bones had turned to water. I held the radio close to my mouth, breathing hard. Sergeant, I took the money out of his hand. Roberto, Matthias said firmly, no one survives that drop. There is no car driving on the highway with that plate. Your camera may have glitched and repeated an old image, and you're exhausted. We're sending a unit to check on you, but you need to calm down. Over and out. The radio went quiet. I sat on the floor with my back against the cabinets, staring at nothing. My brain tried to shove the memory into a safe category: hallucination, fatigue, stress, fog. But my skin still remembered the touch. My nose still remembered the smell. My eyes still remembered the way the jaw hung wrong under the cap. I thought about what Matthias had said, and the idea slid into my mind like something cold. Maybe the dead don't know they're dead. Maybe they just keep going where they meant to go. The Monza was heading up the mountain. It needed to pass the toll. It needed permission, the way everyone does, to keep moving forward. The system clock above me beeped softly. 4:45 a.m. More than an hour until dawn. Outside the plaza, lights glowed weakly in the fog. The world still looked sealed shut. I stayed curled on the booth floor, shaking, waiting for the patrol cruiser to arrive with flashing lights so I could be pulled out of that tiny box and made to feel normal again. Then I heard the engine. It didn't drift in from far away this time. It didn't slowly grow louder through the fog. It just started, close and vibrating, less than 15 feet from my window. The sputter, the misfire, the same sound. A crooked yellow beam washed across the fiberglass wall from outside. He was back, a third time. My heart wasn't beating so much as hammering, like it was trying to break out of my ribs and escape. I clamped my hands over my ears, squeezed my eyes shut, and rocked on the floor like a child. "It's not real," I whispered over and over. "It's not real." The tires stopped right beside my booth window. The smell flooded in through every tiny gap. This time it wasn't just rot and river sludge. It was the heavy, sour stink of opened guts. I didn't stand up. I stayed on the floor. My window was about 3 feet off the ground, and I knew if I lay flat, whoever was in that car couldn't see me. For a few long seconds, nothing happened. The engine bubbled outside, wet and uneven. I prayed that if I didn't show myself, the car would simply leave, that it would get bored or confused or decide to go somewhere else. But toll booth logic doesn't work that way. The barrier arm was down. Without payment, it wouldn't lift. If the driver wanted to pass, he had to complete the routine. From the dark inside the car, a voice spoke. It didn't sound like a normal voice. It sounded like vocal cords ruined by trauma, filled with fluid and mud. It bubbled up as if it had to climb through a crushed throat to reach the air. 960, it wheezed. Open the gate. I didn't move. My body betrayed me in ways I'll never forget. I felt hot urine soak into my uniform pants and spread down my leg. I couldn't even feel embarrassment. I could only feel fear, pure and absolute. Something wet slapped against the booth glass just above my head. A dull, heavy smack. Then another. The thing outside was hitting the window. "Take the money," the voice said again, more desperate now, as if it was suffering. "Take the money." I lay there trembling, then forced myself to look up at an angle through the thick-tempered glass, fogged slightly from the night air. What was pressed against the window wasn't a normal hand. It was a chunk of skull. A jagged piece of shattered bone with hair still attached, tangled with mud and river algae. It was connected to what was left of a face, crushed and ruined, dragging itself out of the car window. Dark blood and black sludge smeared across the glass as it rubbed, trying to reach the payment tray. The smell was unbearable. It felt like it filled the booth and replaced the air. I squeezed my eyes shut and shoved my fingers into my ears as hard as I could. I started shouting a prayer I barely remembered, not even sure who I was praying to, just trying to drown out the wet engine and that bubbling voice. And then, finally, a sound cut through everything else. A siren. Highway patrol. The wail came closer fast, echoing off the canopy in the fog, and red and blue lights flashed through the mist, turning it into a spinning storm of color. The booth seemed to shake with the sudden presence of other people, other engines, reality returning in a rush. When the troopers broke the lock and pulled me out, I was half collapsed, shaking so hard I couldn't stand on my own. Dawn was starting to paint the sky a dull gray. The fog was thinning, lifting in strips like it was peeling away from the ground. The Monza was gone. My lane was empty, just wet asphalt and weeds and the barrier arm sitting there like nothing had happened. They told me I'd had a nervous breakdown, extreme isolation, they said, sleep deprivation. The company's psychiatrist used clean terms, the kind that make a horror story sound like paperwork. They suggested the money with the identical serial numbers was a mistake in my memory or a prank I'd misread in panic. But the troopers couldn't explain what Sergeant Matthias saw when he stepped outside my booth in full daylight and leaned close to the glass. Right at the height where the driver's head had been battering the window, a thick stain had crusted onto the surface. A clump of human hair tangled with river algae was pinned there by a jagged splinter of skull bone. It smelled like swamp sludge and death, and it didn't matter how many times they wiped the glass. The stain stayed. The bills in my drawer might have been dismissed, the serial numbers might have been called coincidence or confusion. The agency could write whatever they needed into their report. But I learned something that night in the fog at KM 214. The toll is always paid. And when you're working alone on the graveyard shift, sitting in a booth at the edge of a rainforest valley where the world feels thin, you don't get to decide who's alive enough to pass through. You only decide whether you're going to keep the gate closed long enough to find out what happens when the dead get tired of asking.